Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make some snowmen again, and this time we're going to make them out of old spindle pieces. Now these are just some that I had in my stash, and I've cut little sections from them, and I know that a lot of these, when you look at them, you don't really see a snowman, but that will just kind of give these different looks, and I think that I can make each of these work for a snowman. Now, I've been asked where you can get spindles, and I just purchase old beds when they're for sale, and usually you can get those very, very cheap, or old chairs, just anything that you can take apart that maybe is headed for the dump, but you can find some interesting spindles on them. I even thought that places like Lowe's or Home Depot, anyone who sells wood and things like that would also have the little spindles that go on banisters, and I think those could be cut up for these. Now, I've already cleaned all of these with some soapy water, and now I'm taking a piece of the ribbon that I use for the snowman hats on the tongue depressors, and because this top kind of flares out, I need to glue both to the very top and to where that first round section starts to come out, and that will give me a straighter hat. Now, I think that felt would work really well for this, but my felt is at the shop in one of the storage sheds, and I didn't want to go dig that out, so I'm just making this work. And I'm not worried about covering the top because I have other plans for that anyway, but I'm just gluing this round. And I went ahead, instead of cutting it here, I just went ahead and went all the way around, and that'll just make my hat thicker. And now I'm going to take a thinner strip of this and fold it into 3 and glue that around for the brim of the hat. So I'm just folding it down on one side and then folding it again. And this is not going to be perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to be adding embellishments that are going to hide anything that is unsightly. And I did have some glue showing that I needed to cover, and again, that's fine because your embellishments can hide any of that. This again is where felt would have worked out better, because what I could have done with the felt is just kind of roll it up. So with this, because I have this flatter brim of the hat, I'm just going to have to very carefully glue it around. And I'm not gluing it flat, I just want that one little edge of it to be glued down. And I'm having to do this slowly because I'm having to make the turn, and so gluing it just straight all the way around is not going to work. I know that I'm not explaining this very well, but hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. And again, I don't care if it looks perfect because I want this to kind of have a primitive look anyway, and so it's going to work. Again, if I were you guys, I would use felt, because this, if you rolled it up, then you could just glue that little roll all the way around this, and that would be a much easier hat. Now, on the other ones, I'm not going to do this for the brim. I am going to use another type of material for this. But on this one, this was the first thing that I thought of. And while it did work, as you can see, it's rather tedious, and I did find a better way. And I made sure to connect the seam of the brim of the hat to the seam on the hat itself, so that I could glue my embellishment there and hide the whole thing at once. And then I tore a strip of coffee-stained tea towel just as thin as I could get it, as thin as it would actually let me rip it. If you go too thin, it's just going to pull apart. But I just found the thinnest amount that I would be able to tear, and did that, and it made the perfect size to glue around this hat. So this alone is going to hide a lot of that hot glue, and then of course I'll be adding more embellishments. And I'm already loving how these little spindles are looking as snowmen, and I've never used these to make snowmen, so I think using the different shapes and sizes gives you a chance to be creative and give them many different types of looks. Now, before I add anything to the top of this, I want to drill a little starter hole there so that I can screw a little eye hook in the top, and that is where I can add my hanger. Now, I didn't mention that this spindle already had a chippy finish, so I didn't paint this one. But I want to add some snow look to this, so I'm just going to rub some of this joint compound on the top of the hat and on the top of the brim of the hat to resemble snow. And just use whatever works for you. This is a little tool of some kind that I found at the Dollar Tree that I'm using. And then I took a very thin strip that I had torn from some gingham fabric, and I'm going to tie that around the neck for a scarf. Now, if you don't like doing snowman faces, then I wouldn't worry about it. I think these will be really cute even without a face. But I think it's a simple thing for me to just draw a little face on. So I'm going to take a Sharpie marker and just make some little dots for eyes and draw a tiny little mouth on it. Now, you could also do little tiny dots for the mouth as well, but for this one, just drew it on. And then I just started gluing some little tiny pieces of greenery on the hat. So I added a little bit of greenery and just a few little tiny berries, and that was enough for this tiny little hat. And now I want to add some buttons, and because I think buttons would be too large for this, even the little shirt buttons I think would be a little large. So instead of adding that, I'm just going to draw little crosses or little X's for the buttons. Then I can just pick the size that I want. Now I just did 3. I didn't want to do one on that very bottom. And then I took a small brush and some terracotta colored paint. Now just any orange will do. I just happen to like the muted look of this terracotta color, and drew a tiny little nose. And then I took some white paint and just added a very, very tiny dot above or on the top of each eye to add a little twinkle, and then also a very light line across his nose to add some highlight. And that was my first little snowman complete. And because I have several that I want to do, then I'm just going to go ahead and paint all of them that I have in the color cotton, and if I want to tone them down, then I can either add some brown wax or some brown glaze, or in some cases, with this being a darker finish, I will get some bleed through, and that might give it the look that I want. If I get too much bleed through, then I'll just go over it with some clear coat and start over, but I think that these will work just to go ahead and paint all of them. And some of these that have a rougher finish, Instead of painting them solid like this, I'm going to dry brush over them. So I'll just kind of use them to clean the brush off more or less. And as you can see, the one there in the front that's already done is one that I already dry brushed on. And the easiest way for me to paint these is just to hold on to them and get my hands all messy. So that's fine with me because, again, I want these to have a rustic finish. Now, there was one of these that I just couldn't find a way to make it work for a snowman without adding something to it. And because some of these, I already had these pieces cut, maybe that I had cut off of another spindle. And I've cut some specifically for these snowmen. And then, like this one here, it was one that I had cut off another spindle. So, by adding this bead with one flat end, and I don't even know where I got this bead. I'm sure you can get them at Hobby Lobby, but I think I was given this in some crafting supplies. And my big decision here was which end do I put it on, and I decided that instead of making this one an ornament, I wanted to make it one that just kind of sits on its own. So for that reason, I decided to leave the large end, let the large end be the bottom, and let the small end be the top. So I glued my bead on top of the small end. And I'm pretty sure since this wood on the bottom of the bead is unfinished and the wood on top of the spindle is fresh cut, it should hold well with just the hot glue. But to make certain that it holds well, when I wrap my cloth around the neck of it for the scarf, I'm going to make sure and add glue all the way around that so that it has contact with both the head and the neck. And that should add that extra assurance that my head will hold on well. Now I'm just going to use a Sharpie for the eyes and the mouth. And I'm just putting little dots on. And then I'm going to use some of the colored terracotta. If you've been watching me long, you know that I use that for the nose. And it's just a good muted orange from Dixie Belle that works perfect for me for the nose. And so I'm just going to paint on a simple little nose. And then I just added a little twinkle in the eye by dotting a little bit of white over the top of that, and also drawing a little highlight across the top of the nose with white. Now, to add some extra assurance that my glue will stick, and because it's raw wood to raw wood, I don't think that there'll be a problem at all. But when I add my little scarf around the neck, I make sure to make contact with both the bead and the spindle. Here I am adding the glue and making sure that I fill in that little crack there between the wood and the body, or the wood bead and the wood body. And I'm just making sure that when I glue this around that it makes contact with both the head and the body. And then I just tie it and glue that scarf the way I want it to lay. And again, that should hold that head even better. And for the buttons on this one, I just decided to draw little X's instead of buttons. Now, I did start to use some buttons on some of the other ones, and this was one that maybe I could have used buttons on, but I like the look of just a little X also. Another thing that I could have done for the buttons is cut out a little circle from a piece of fabric and do the X on the cloth circle and glue that on. That would have worked also. And here I am using some Distress ink and making this one look a little bit darker and a little bit more aged. Give him a little bit more of a primitive look. And I even do some of that on the little scarf as well. And I wanted to add some arms to this one. So I drilled some holes in the side. And now I'm going to take some glue and hot glue these little pieces of grapevine inside. Generally, what I would use for this would be some little twigs from the yard. But we had some rain, and I didn't want to wait on those to dry out. So I'm just kind of improvising here and using some little pieces of grapevine. You could also use some little pieces of flower stems if you wanted. Or I guess you could use a thicker gauge wire. But I like the wood look on this, and again, since we got the rain, I just decided to make this do instead. Now, if I had had the toe of a child's sock that I liked the color of, I could have just cut the toe out and used that for a toboggan. But I'm just kind of making a little makeshift hat here, and I'm just using some gingham fabric and going around the top. I'm just gluing it all the way around the top, and then I can cut it to the length to make it more like a toboggan type hat. And I also could make this more of a little sleep hat and let it just be longer, but that isn't the look that I wanted for this one. So I've taken this fabric and just folded a little cuff in the bottom and then glued that around. Then I'm going to, after I glue that back together well, then I'm going to cut this to the length that it needs to be and then tie a little piece of twine. And I think I just used a little piece of baker's twine to tie this together and then cut the excess off. Then I just glued a little bit of greenery there on one side of the hat. Now this next one may not be exactly the shape that you would expect a snowman to be, but if you look closely enough at these pieces, you'll be able to see how you can make them look like a snowman. So I want to do a hat on this one. I'm going to use obviously the larger side as the head, and then I'm going to use this little cork as the hat, or as the main part of the hat, that is. Now I have this leather fabric here, and it's the same leather fabric that I used on the last one, and this one is like a really dark green, and I'm just cutting a piece large enough to cover the outer edge of this little cork. So I'll just glue that on, and then that will be the top to my hat. And then I cut a larger circle to be the brim of the hat, and I can just glue that right on top of that spindle and then glue the other piece on top of that. Now, if you don't have the leather, again, I got mine at Joann's, and actually there was a whole bag of it, and I think it was like $4.99, but it was just kind of scrap pieces. But that works for items like this. So I'm just going to glue that on and then glue the other part over the top of that. And now, if you don't have the leather and you don't want to go to Joann's to get it, then you can always use felt or wool or any thick fabric. Now I'm just going to glue that on top of the brim, and then to cover up that top part, because I'm not going to add snow to this one, then I'm just going to cut a smaller piece that can fit right on top of the hat. And as you can see, I cut it just a bit larger, and I can just trim away the excess fabric. Now, I don't know if you've noticed with this one, but there's a little chunk out of the bottom of it there, and there's also a little nail. I think it's some sort of a little finishing nail that just the head of that shows, but I didn't mind that at all. Actually, that was one of the reasons I picked this one, because I think it just adds a little extra character to him. And now I'm going to screw this little eye hook right in the top of the hat. And that can be what I hang the hanger from. And then I'm going to use the same technique that I used on the other one and just draw a simple little eyes and mouth with my Sharpie marker. Now, I didn't mention that these will all get clear coated afterwards. And obviously, just like with the last one, I'll add a little twinkle in the eye with a little dot of white paint. And then the nose will get drawn on with terracotta Dixie Belle chalk paint. And here I've torn a strip of some plaid fabric, and I'm just tying the little scarf around him. I'm trying to match this green, and so then I'll just tie that around and glue that in place. And then I want to add some buttons to this one, and I decided to go ahead and try to find some buttons that were small enough. And as you can see here, I think these will be plenty small, but I want, the color is just kind of tan, and there's some tan in that scarf, but I still want to add some of the green down on the body. So I just took some little pieces of this same fabric and cut them into little squares and used my scissors to rough up the edges of them and glued both of those in place, and then glued the button on top of that. So the fabric does two things. One thing that it does, and here I am kind of squishing that up because I want to add a little bit of depth also, but putting the cloth on first does a few things actually. It gives it more of a primitive look. It gives it more character, I think. It kind of makes those buttons stand out a little better. And I just think it just adds a cute little finish to this. Also, I forgot to mention the main reason is that when you're hot gluing the buttons onto the wood, they're not very likely to stay. But when you glue the fabric onto the wood and then the button onto the fabric, it stays really well. Now here I'm tying a piece of cheesecloth around the top of the hat, and then I can add a little embellishment there, but I think that gives him more of a rustic look. And also, just as we brought some of that green down to the body, it's a way of adding some of the tan from the buttons up to the hat. Now you can use these same techniques with large spindles if you had a large spindle. And I think sometimes the spindles that you get that go on banisters or bedposts would actually be perfect to make a snowman in a larger size that maybe you have on your mantle or tabletop or something like that. And now for the next one, I want to make the head on the larger side. So I'm taking my sander and just kind of going around the bottom to soften that bottom just a little bit more. And then I went ahead and sanded some more on the spindle to add some more character there. Then I decided to take my distress ink and go over this one to age it some more. Again, I draw my face the same way I did with the other ones. And because this one has so many more little sections, I want to add more buttons, but I'm going to skip that very bottom one. And here I am gluing some cheesecloth that I've just kind of cut and wadded up and put on each of these 4 little sections. And then, although I got coordinating buttons, I didn't get all the same color. So I alternated my colors here and glued these little buttons on over the top of this cheesecloth. And on this one, I decided to make the hat without using the cork. So instead of wrapping it around the cork, I just cut a little piece of fabric that was the length that I needed to glue it together to make the hat. And then I just very carefully glued a smaller circle around the top. And probably what I should have done here is cut the circle larger. I actually cut this one just to fit. And so it was just a little bit harder to place, where if I had cut it larger, I could have very easily glued it and then trimmed away the excess. But as you can see here, I'm kind of having to fill that in and replace that. But it still worked, and again, you don't really need the cork at all. Now, you could also use a cork if you wanted to and paint that cork. But then you would need something that would be similar to that for the brim of the hat. So I think using a stiffer cloth kind of works better for me than trying to paint that cork. And I know typically you see black hats or dark hats on a snowman, but I thought this little brown leather hat was really cute, so I didn't worry with trying to paint this. Now for this particular one, I wanted that hat to sit down on the head a little bit more, so I decided to cut the inside of the circle out and then glue it where it sits down on there a little bit better. And then I glued my hat to the top. And here I am adding the cheesecloth around the top, and I don't worry about this being neat at all. I like it very rustic, so I almost twist it a little bit and make sure that it's a little bit straggly and not so neat. And in that case there, where I had it a little bit too straggly, I can just twist that and hide that as well. And because I was really liking the look of this cheesecloth with this one, I decided to also use that as the scarf. Now I know I haven't added the little hook for the hanger on this one, but because this one has some height, I decided that I would make it to go in some sort of container arrangement. And in this case, I wouldn't have had to do at least those 2 bottom buttons, but they're there for no matter what I use it for. And so I just went ahead and went all the way down with the buttons. Now this next one wasn't a shape that I could make a snowman out of at all without adding something to it. So I'm adding a wooden bead here that has a flat bottom, and I'm not sure where I got this one. I think I got it in some craft materials that someone gave me, but it was the perfect size to just glue there on the top. So I just took some white paint and haphazardly painted over that and let that dry. And now I can turn this one into a snowman. And because at this point, this one seemed to be kind of all neck, I do really like the way it looks. I think it's going to make a cute little ornament, or a cute little snowman actually. But I took some faux greenery and added a little spray around the neck. At this point, I decided that I was going a little bit large on that, so I just kind of trimmed it down and added that little spray. And I want this one to have a little bit more of a festive look, so I'm going to really try to add some contrast. So in that case, I didn't want to add my antiquing ink or my distress ink to this one. I just like the look of the white against the greenery. And to add even more contrast, I decided to add some red berries as well. Now, after I got my little spray around the neck done, then I decided that I did still want a scarf on it. So in hindsight, I think it would have been better to wait on the spray until after I added the scarf. But what I did for this, since I wasn't able to go underneath the spray with the scarf, I just cut a little strip that was just long enough to start at one side of the spray and reach all the way around to the other side, and I glued that in place. And then I cut another little strip that was long enough to tie in a knot in the center and let it hang down and be the part of the scarf that hangs down, if that makes sense. I know I could have explained that better. But then I took the remaining part of the strip and I tied it in a knot in the center and then glued that to the side and let that hang down. And that was just a way that I could still make it look like a scarf, but I didn't have to try and go underneath that greenery. Now, with either of these snowmen, you could easily leave the face off, and some people prefer that look, and depending on which snowman I'm making, sometimes I prefer that. But I'm going to put a face on this one, and I'm also going to add a couple of buttons. And for the fabric underneath the buttons on this one, I'm just using some of that same fabric that I used on the scarf, except that I'm trying to avoid the red part. And then just gluing that down. As you can see, I'm using my scissors to really rough up these edges because I think that that gives it a much better look. And then, as you can see, it glues to this really well, and then those buttons glue on there. I've used this process or this technique for a long time in adding my buttons to wood snowmen because it just really, really takes care of the problem of it not wanting to stick. And I also just really love the character that it gives these and the added texture that it adds. And in this case, I needed the contrast between those white buttons anyway. Now I'm going to drill a hole through the head to add my little eye hook into the head because I'm not going to put a hat on this one. Then I added a little face to this one also. And for this one, I just drew the little mouth on instead of adding the dots. Now for the next one, I'm going to make the hat the same way that I have on the others, except on this one, I'm going to go ahead and glue the brim of the hat down, but then when I make the little top part of the hat, I'm just going to leave the top open. So after I glued the brim of the hat down on this one, then I went ahead and drilled a hole to add my little eye hook, and then I put some jute twine in it as a hanger, because if I waited until after I glued the top part of the hat down, then that would have been impossible to get to. And I know you're thinking, or probably thinking, that it's odd that I'm going to have the top of the hat open. But the reason that I'm doing that is I had an idea that instead of putting greenery on the outside of the hat, that I would let some little sprigs of greenery come up through the top of the hat. Just a little something different. After I did it, it was okay, but I don't know if I would do it again. It just gave it a little bit of a different look. And then instead of using fabric to go around the top of the hat, I used some jute ribbon that I got from the Dollar Tree instead. And now I'm using some homespun fabric around the neck of this one. And this homespun is just a little bit thicker than the other that I was using, but it still works good on this little scarf. And then I added my face to this one. and my buttons with fabric underneath them. And then I just started hot gluing some little pieces of greenery in the hat. And I think I even finished it off with a very small little pine cone. Again, I'm not certain that I will use this technique on a hat again. Maybe if I had added the right items into the top of it, maybe with some contrast, it might have helped. But I think that from now on, I'll be putting a top in the hats. But I hope that if you guys can get your hands on some spindles, that you will try these. I think that you'll agree that they are so much fun to make. And I hope you enjoyed this video and hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.